Okay, we're live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm going to let your audios fully connect before I start speaking. Good to see you all. I see some wonderful Zoom backgrounds on here. Timmy Tullis, you're winning right now.
We Alaskans often win with scenery.
There you go. There you go. Hello, everyone. We have a few more people waiting to connect their audios, and then we will get started. I see my friend John Schneider. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for the invitation. Really looking forward to this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. I think we are mostly all connected. So hello again, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, State Level Advocacy in the Era of COVID-19. I hope your spirits are well and that you and your loved ones are healthy and safe. I'm Mariel Novas. I'm the Assistant Director of Partnerships and Engagement for Massachusetts with the Education Trust. Although more importantly right now, I am a Black Dominican immigrant woman who cares deeply about educational and racial justice for historically marginalized students and communities. We are here today because we find ourselves at the intersection of multiple crises: the coronavirus pandemic and the original public health crisis that is white supremacy and structural racism. Today we are joined by EdTrust leaders from 5 states: Chris Nellum from California, Natasha Oshemirski from Massachusetts, Tramel Howard from Louisiana, Jeannie Pupo-Walker from Tennessee, and Dia Bryant from New York. As our national leadership in many ways has abdicated responsibility during this time, governors and state level leaders like our panelists have emerged as being more critical than ever in guarding the safety and the rights of the communities that we are in service of and that we love. While COVID-19 has shifted our gaze, it's definitely not shifted our focus. We know that education equity matters now more than ever as we fight these 2 pandemics. So a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Please use the chat function, as I see that you already are starting to. Introduce yourselves while we're chatting so you kind of get a sense of what's in the room. We have people from Alaska, I know already, and surely we have folks from all across the country. So please be active on there. You'll see that I might be as well. I love a good chat. And please also note that this webinar will be recorded and will be shared with you all afterwards as well. So let's get started and get to know our panel of wonderful leaders. So we are going to, and you'll kind of hear me queuing them with time and order just to make sure that we can flow easily. But we're going to start by just having each one introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about you, help us get to know you, and then help us get to know your state. Give us sort of a broad overview of what it's been like in each of your states these last few months, and what you would like for our audience to know about what's been going on there. Excuse me. So we're going to go in the following order. We're going to go New York, Massachusetts, Louisiana, Tennessee, and California. And each state will have 4 minutes to share. So we're going to kick it off with Dia from New York, and she'll tell us a little bit about herself and her state.
Thanks, Mariel. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Dia Bryant. I am a lifelong educator, teacher, former school founder, principal, and I experienced the world as a Black woman, a Black wife to a beautiful Black man, a mother to a Black boy, and a Black girl. And I consider myself and them all students of the civil rights movement. And it feels so good to be in this moment with them and to let them see what's happening in our world. And as a family, we are growing even closer together. So I consider myself incredibly privileged to share with you today a little bit about what's happening in New York State. Specifically, New York City and much of our downstate area was hit pretty hard by COVID. In many ways, people have named it the epicenter. We have also been no stranger to police brutality for hundreds of years. And for those reasons, our education system also has sort of been a victim of the systemic racism as well. And so we show up in this moment more convinced than ever that educational equity is not only important, it is imperative. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about some of the things we've been doing in both all over the state, both in our downstate, sort of most populous area that people know as New York City, but also throughout the state in what we call some of the big five. So thank you, and I'm going to pass it off.
Dia, would you mind just adding how your state has fared during this moment in time and giving us a little bit of context about the atmosphere in New York?
Yeah, our state has been spotty. So we have sort of downstate, which is New York City. The actual city has 1.1 million children and 1,800 schools. Throughout the state, we have 688 districts, all of which serve different types of students, both ethnically, linguistically. Some areas are incredibly rural and have struggled to come up with Wi-Fi, like many of our areas throughout the country. We also have disparate responses to COVID in general, and we've had significant sort of variability, I guess would be the word, in terms of how it's impacted different families and different communities, with it disproportionately impacting, of course, our Black and Brown communities across the state. I think our biggest priority as a state throughout all of both COVID and the civil unrest has been to think through how we support our students through these moments, how we support our leaders through these moments, how we guarantee that there will be quality teachers in the fall that are not only there for content, but there for social emotional support for our students. That's sort of been where we are and what we're thinking about.
Thank you, Dia. Natasha?
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all. Thank you so much for having me. I am the state director for Massachusetts at Ed Trust. I have had the privilege of working with many of you during my nearly 12 years now with the organization, and it's great to see your names and faces pop up. I, for the last roughly year and a half, have been focused on our work here in Massachusetts, where we convene the Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership, which is a collective effort of civil rights, social justice, and education groups from across the state that are working together to fight for education, greater educational equity in a state that frankly largely likes to think of itself as a leader in education and does not like to think about or talk about all of the things that underlie those high rankings. I come to Ed Trust and to this work for very personal, frankly, reasons. I am a refugee. I came to this country at the age of 10 with my family from the former Soviet Union. I started out as an English language learner. And frankly, in a lot of ways, partially because of my family background and because of the color of my skin, have been able to benefit from many of the opportunities in the United States that so many students are denied. And when I compare my experience to the experience of many other immigrant youth, that to me has been a call to sort of, I feel like part of my purpose has to be to address those inequities in our system. And so we are privileged here in Massachusetts to work with a group of amazing, nearly 30 amazing social justice, civil rights, and education organizations that come to this work from kind of representing different perspectives from different parts of the state with different agendas in some cases, but all of us with a deep commitment to driving greater educational equity. And in this time of COVID-19 and this time of civil unrest and really movement and attention to the structural racism across the country and in our state, I think there's both kind of great pain and also great opportunity. COVID hit Massachusetts really hard and really early on. After New York and New Jersey, we were for a long time the state with the third most cases. We still have some of the highest fatality numbers in the United States. And within our state, the crisis really hit our low-income communities and our communities of color the hardest, with frankly infection rates that are that are multiple times as high in some of our districts than in others. And when we think about, obviously all that has meant for our families, the economic disruptions, and the personal disruptions, the trauma that comes with, that in itself is overwhelming. And I think in some ways, the educational situation hasn't been particularly helpful. I think probably the best way to describe the educational experience for our students during this time is inconsistent. Some of that has been almost unavoidable, right? There were deep disparities in Massachusetts before COVID in things like access to technology and students' home circumstances that may make it harder to spend a whole lot of time in front of a computer, right? But also, I think there was a, frankly, lack of clear expectations throughout this process that really undermined some students' experiences and really led to many teachers being forced to make decisions on their own about how they're going to handle this for their students. And so as a result, we had some students that were basically doing school more or less as usual, just from home, and some students who hadn't heard from their teacher in weeks, right? So that's been sort of the background against which we've been working. We're a state with a great deal of sort of local control tendencies also. And so that can have hard implications for equity at the best of times, never mind during a pandemic. Stop there and turn it over to Trammell.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Trammell Howard, and I serve as the Louisiana Policy Manager and External Relations Manager for the state of Louisiana with Education Trust. It is indeed a privilege and honor to be here today with you to talk about where we go with advocacy in the times of COVID-19. I show up to this work as a Black man. I was born to a single mother, a single teenage mother, and so education has always been a pathway to success and opportunity for me. Education literally saved my life. I often tell the story that while my grandfather only had a 9th grade education, he knew the value of becoming successful in receiving education. And so like I've always used education as a pathway to opportunity. So I show up into this work every day looking for opportunities to create that pathway to opportunity for every student, specifically students who look like me, specifically Black males in this work. I also serve in this work as a school board member in a district that only graduates 50% of African American males. So this is really indeed a personal opportunity to help bring educational achievement to students throughout this district. So I appreciate the work that all of you do to make sure that we really get education right and create that pathway to opportunity. Louisiana, we know, everyone knows Louisiana. We typically show up at the bottom of every list, the bottom of education, the bottom of health, the bottom of opportunity, the bottom of economic mobility, the bottom of housing opportunities. And so it's really indeed my hope that Louisiana one day is at the top of all of those lists. Throughout COVID-19, we have experienced again, one of the epicenters of the virus and pandemic. And again, that pandemic and virus also targeted African Americans at a higher rate than our white counterparts. And so every day, as a Black man, I feel like we've always been living in a pandemic state. So right now, the world is seeing it in the form of a virus, but we also see it in the form of police brutality. We also see it in the form of wealth and income gaps. We also receive it and see it in the form of achievement and educational opportunities. So it's really a passion of mine to make sure that we get education right and that we live through this pandemic in a way that creates opportunity. And I think this pandemic has been a gift and a curse, specifically in Louisiana, because it's allowed the world to sit down for a moment and just reflect on other folks' stories. Because so often we live this world with our own life as our priority and not thinking about others. And so the pandemic has really set us down to think about how other people experience this world. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation and provide any insight that I can on how we move this work forward going forward. So thank you, guys.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeannie Poopa-Walker, and I'm the State Director for the Education Trust in Tennessee, and we opened this office in January. I'm here bringing greetings on behalf of my teammates Alexa Barajas-Clark and Vilmaes Gonzalez, and to all our Tennessee people that are on the call today. Thank you for joining us. I come to this work as a native Nashvilleian, as the daughter of Cuban immigrants, but I'm also a former high school teacher, a district administrator, and was most recently an education policy director at Conexión Américas here in Nashville. But I'm an advocate, but I'm also an elected official, as is Trammell. I am a elected school board member in Nashville, Tennessee, and proudly the first Latino or Latina elected to the school board in the state of Tennessee. And so I believe in showing up and working hard on behalf of our communities, building tables where people can sit and come up with meaningful solutions for their communities. And so that is what the work of Education Trust is. So when we opened this office, we got to work listening to students, listening to educators, meeting with partners, and really proudly putting a flag in the ground for equity and education justice in Tennessee. And so, of course, we quickly pivoted to COVID when COVID set in Tennessee, and have really tried to monitor and speak out on issues related to that. I want to note that COVID is on the rise again in Tennessee right now. We have more hospitalizations this week than ever. And Memphis has returned to phase 1 2 days ago because of the dramatic increase in cases. And so that creates a lot of uncertainty for district leaders, for decision makers on returning to school. In Tennessee, we return to school early compared to a lot of you. We start often the first week of August, sometimes even a little earlier. And that's just around the corner. So when COVID hit, the governor, of course, called for schools to close, and we were not equipped. We have so many districts with low levels of internet access, particularly in rural communities, but also know that 50% of students in Memphis do not have access to internet in their home. So this is really a crisis, and we're really pushing the state to respond. And so we have done a lot of work around pushing for how money is allocated, how CARES Act work is allocated, weighing in on what we think the commissioner should do, and really watching closely as we approach the opening of school, and making sure our students' experiences and the disparate impact of this virus on our communities is acknowledged by decision makers, and so that our families feel like they can return to school safely or teach their children at home and help their children learn successfully at home if that's the case. And so very proud to do this work with the Ed Trust team, and looking forward to this conversation.
And up next, we have Chris from California.
Hi, everyone. I was going to say good morning. We're just past noon, so I guess good afternoon now. It's good to be here with all of you. I'm logging on today from Oakland, California. As you can see, I hope on our screen, I'm a Black man. I live in a house with lots of Black art behind me, as you can see with the afro right there, which is wonderful. But seriously, I come to this work in similar ways, perhaps to my colleague Trammell. I'm the oldest boy of 3 boys. My mother was a teenage single mother. I'm a product of poverty. I grew up in Brawley, California. It's in the Imperial Valley. We are on the map, the closest county to Mexico and Arizona, so the bottom right-hand corner of California, if you know our map. I come to this as a Pell Grant recipient and Cal Grant recipient, and so I know poverty quite well, and never want to be back there, but also understand that I'm actually not that far from it, even though some days it can feel like it. So I come to this work sort of with that experience and also with that fear at the same time. I also come to this work, I think, sort of, I'm always questioning, I think the Education Trust is a fantastic organization. I am always questioning sort of my own ability, of whether I'm doing enough. I'm the children of civil rights I'm a child of civil rights activists who their activism looks much different. I'm always aware also, we're an organization that works with and on behalf of students. So I think a lot about, students who started movements, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, those young folks started the civil rights movement in many ways or accelerated it. There are young folks at UC Berkeley who, even before President Obama was thinking about DACA, was forcing Californians to think about the rights of, undocumented folks. And so Also, there were young folks at Howard University that I think about who, forced Howard, a historically Black college, to be more thoughtful about how they engage with their students. I'm also in California. A big thing for us right now is we're about to give our voters the chance to repeal affirmative action, the ban on affirmative action, which was 25 years in the making. And I think about young people. Young people got a legislator to put that on her agenda and have got us to this moment. So I think a lot about those things in this work. I also think a lot about what's happening in California around this current crisis that is really an accentuation of the crisis that we know in America around racial injustice. I think a lot about the Bay Area. We were the first county, I think, in the country to go on lockdown. And while that may sound like a great thing, I also live in Oakland, Black city. I also live in a community, in a neighborhood that is very mixed. And so while we went on lockdown early, there are still Oakland has cases that are rising. Oakland has always had a higher proportion of cases than some other places in the state. And so as I think about those things and layer that on top of the work that we do at EdTrust, my role at the organization at EdTrust West, we are the California-based office, as Deputy Director of Research and Policy. And so I think a lot about what that means for our work. We do K through 12 and higher education research and advocacy. And on the K through 12 side, we're thinking a lot about, or on the P through 12 side, we're thinking a lot about early education and what it means for young people, but also what it means for the mostly Black and Latino women who are running early ed centers in our state. And so that's something that's on our mind. We can't separate childcare from employment for those folks, and hopefully upward mobility at some point. And we also are thinking a lot, like my colleague shared, from Tennessee, the tension between local control and the state having a responsibility to mostly Black and brown kids to do better and at least have a floor for what they're doing around the so-called distance learning. We're also thinking a lot about what it means to suggest that learning is happening, or whether or not it is happening, and what it means for Black and brown kids. On the higher ed side, similarly, we're thinking a lot about the reluctance of our higher ed leaders to document what's happening. If we can't measure it, we can't hold you accountable for it. And so we're trying to be thoughtful about getting them to be more honest about what's happening. We have institutions that argue that they didn't close, they just went online. But we also have students at a university who were pushed out of dorms and set up a camp outside of the University of California, Santa Cruz, who, their dorms did close. So things did close. You didn't just move online. So we're thinking about food and housing and security issues. And the last thing I'll say before my time is up is we're thinking a lot about the budget. Our budget just got approved, or is about to be approved, and it is scary what is coming for us in California. We're looking at $1 billion cut on the higher ed side, $1 billion on the higher ed side, and lots of deferrals, which is a fancy word for we're going to take a gamble on the K through 12 side and see what happens. And that, for us, as we think about equity, is concerning. And so we're trying to think about ways to keep folks honest and hold them accountable. So it's great to be here in community with you here today, and look forward to the rest of our conversation.
Thank you so much, Chris, and all of you for the window into your lives, the window into your stories, your families, your bedroom or living room art in the case of Chris, and also just what's going on in your states. I think there's something beautiful and painful that happens when we can share across lines, in this case geographic lines, and see sort of all the sort of matters that unite us and the things that we are all facing that we have in common, and also the sort of the unique aspects of the experiences that folks are having across the country. Some of you work with coalitions. With us in Massachusetts, as Natasha previewed, we work with the Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership. And I can share from our perspective that it has felt in the last 3 months that it's been drinking from the fire hose, as the expression goes. It's sort of been coming fast and furious. And I we'll never tire of extending gratitude to our partners for the work that they have done over these last 3 months. But I imagine that you all have had to prioritize some of that work. So I'd love to invite New York, California, and Massachusetts to share a little bit about what have been the priorities for your work in your state. What are some of the actions that you have taken so far? What's worked well for you all? What has been challenging during this time? And if you can please answer that in about 4 minutes, that would be awesome. So I'll kick it first to Dia. And to just repeat my question, what are some of the priorities that EdTrust New York is focused on right now? And what is some of the work that you've undertaken during this time?
Thanks, Mariel. At the EdTrust New York, our biggest priority, I think, throughout COVID has been listening. And when I say listening, we've taken a few actions to make sure that we're listening to our partners, we're listening to people across the state, and in partnership with ETW, we were able to listen nationally. And right now, I think we've noticed through a series of polls that we've done, sort of a parents of infants and toddlers, K-12, we're on our second poll, and a higher ed poll, we've learned a lot about the gaps between what parents expect or what students expect and what institutions are actually providing. And so we've focused a lot of our work on talking about those gaps and making recommendations about those gaps and learning from our partners whether or not those gaps are real. And they are. And so we've learned a lot about food insecurity. We've been focused a ton recently on reopening. And next week we will release a reopening policy brief, the results of a reopening poll of K-12 parents, and we will release sort of our findings of reviewing the closure plans of about 50 top districts throughout the state. We've also focused a lot on sort of giving our partners and giving agencies and institutions throughout the state the information they need to be successful. So our higher ed partners, which happens to be the State University of New York, we've had maybe 5 or 6 virtual conversations with their top leadership to talk to them about what students feel nationally, to talk to them about how students are experiencing sort of virtual learning. And Chris, to your point, sort of what students are actually nervous about returning to the fall and how they can stand in that gap. We have been convening our early education, we call it Raising New York, our early education coalition, to talk through what childcare looks like in the future, to make several sets of recommendations to the state about the CARES Act funding for childcare and how we should spend that and what it should look like. So we've really been prioritizing elevating the voice of parents, of our partners, and doing this work. With this afternoon, we have another parent forum where parents will give their voice to reopening and talk through the creation of a set of recommendations that they have so that their voice is not missed in this. So all in all, I think we've been doing a ton of listening. We prioritize that. And then we prioritize making our recommendations aligned to what the field is saying versus pontificating about, what is probably happening. And I actually think it's positioned us to learn a lot more about our partners and their priorities, and to really focus our work on what an equitable opening would be that suits both our community-based partners, our communities, and the issues and stance that we have.
And Dia, could you share a little bit more about challenges that you all have faced in sort of that listening campaign, both at the local level and obviously sort of surveying the national landscape?
Yeah, I'll share a huge one. In our higher education poll with EdTrust West, the top lines, I think when we first saw the data, there were about 15 things that we wanted to talk about. And we really had to think through, okay, which of these issues is going to be most pertinent to our partners? Which one of these will show up as most salient? So many of our students are worried about financial aid. They're worried about, social emotional services. In fact, many of our Black and brown students actually report not having access to services. So we really had to look and say, are we going to prioritize the social emotional, the instructional continuity, and then how do we actually reshape all of this data so that we can actually be inclusive of some of the, I mean, honestly, some of the amazingly interesting data around mental health throughout our state that both families and students sort of put right at the top of their list. And as educators, I don't know if that's always top. We think a lot about academics and instruction, but really we see more now than ever that those two are tethered. And I think that's been one of our biggest things, is just thinking through how do we prioritize all this information, and then how do we sort of use those issues as leverage toward some of our bigger agenda items.
Thank you, Dia. I really responded to your use of the word tethered. There is no disentangling the academics and the social justice, social emotional piece anymore. Sort of like we've been having, there's an expression in Spanish, tapar el sol con un dedo, when you cover the sun with one finger. We can't do that anymore, right? And so we have to understand the ways in which these things are linked and have forever been linked, but now we have to really dedicate that attention. So thanks for that. And I'm excited to hear now from Chris at ETW, at EdTrust West. I know that you all have also done similar work around polling your folks. So would love to hear what have been the priorities for you all at EdTrust West and for the coalitions that you work with, and what has proved, sort of where have you seen outcomes that are positive and where have you experienced roadblocks?
Yeah, thank you. I'll start a little bit about some challenges, and then try to talk about some big picture challenges, and then talk about some of our successes, because I think some of these lessons may be really helpful for folks, and I hope I'm on the right question. One of the sets of challenges that we've had is, as a community, as a set of coalitions, given the budget constraints we anticipated, it's really hard. And I know we all know the, sort of nonprofit industrial complex, and how folks, in nonprofit spaces, and what it means to be at a nonprofit or in a community-based org and trying to work with and on behalf of communities. Sometimes that those things can be in conflict with one another. And so one of our early challenges was to get clear with ourselves and with our partners and do listening, as my colleague Dia talked about. So we did some polling as well of early ed, K-12, and higher ed in partnership with EdTrust New York. But we also did some listening sessions where we just listened, like in real time, to educators, to parents, to mothers, to women of color, to higher ed administrators. And we realized that we needed to get clear as a community on what we wanted to focus on now, right? We all had priorities coming into this year, and we had to get clear so that we had a clear message that was going to decision makers about what can we truly focus on right now, given that our state made it very clear that they weren't going to take up, at least on the state level, they weren't going to take up anything that was not related to COVID recovery in the budget. And so that has severe implications for what can happen on the ground in our schools and in our colleges. So that was a challenge. It continues to be a challenge. We think we arrived at some items, learning loss and addressing learning loss. It has been an issue that is not only important, but that has broken through as an issue that we all can get around as a community and set of coalitions here. Better measuring and addressing the digital divide has also become an issue that we can all agree on. At EdTrust West, we built a tool in K-12, on the K-12 side, that gave districts at least some estimate that they could hold on to and use to advocate for additional resources. What we were experiencing was folks were throwing resources just out into the world and hoping that they were landing in the right places. And we sort of know when that happens, who gets lost in the shuffle. That's typically brown and Black kids. And so we wanted to build a tool that could say, hey, no, in Oakland at this school, there are lots of Black kids there, and you actually have a gap that we want to hold you accountable for filling, like addressing. And so that's a second issue that we have been able to address out of that challenge, the challenge to be clear about what's happening. I think the third challenge on the one on the higher ed side is trying to get clear. I was on a panel. It was our first time partnering with our Muslim Students Association here in California, and they're very rightfully concerned about data and tracking of these issues. And so we're trying to get higher ed to be more thoughtful about how to track these issues, and we're trying to force some things to happen there in partnership. Other issues that have come up for us that I think we're trying to address as coalitions is how do we focus on the near term, but also plan for the future? Plan for the future. And so trying to get folks, sorry, the chat popped up. And how do we do that, effectively as a set of partners to look forward? So one of the things is, as a statewide organization, but also working with coalition folks, like how do we focus on food and housing insecurity issues at the same time we're trying to plan for the fall and beyond? So those are some of the things that we're trying to address. I think we've been really successful in two ways. Our coalition has pushed the media so that a conversation about the recovery cannot exclude education. And that has, I think we've been really successful in trying not only to get at trust in the media, but to support our partners who are closer to the ground to be in the media too. And so the governor, for example, or the state superintendent of schools cannot ignore the relevance of education for the, the so-called recovery. I think we've also been successful in direct advocacy. And so we got a couple executive orders from our governor to address some issues. And so, the legislature takes longer, but our coalition was clear that we needed some more immediate attention. So those are some issues we're trying to address here in California.
Thank you so much, Chris and Dia, and EdTrust West and EdTrust New York for the hustle and the efforts that you all have undertaken to really shed light on what our families are saying and what their needs are. I'm gonna kick it now to my better half, Natasha from Massachusetts, to share with our crew here some of the work that we've taken on right here in Mass.
Absolutely. And, as Marielle said, we can never sort of give too much credit to our partners. We're incredibly fortunate to work with, again, a broad range of organizations, many of whom work directly with families and communities and with educators. And so while we may not ourselves be doing as much sort of direct convening of families, we're getting the concerns and sort of the voices of families that are sort of being fed into our work through our partners. And I think COVID-19 has been just a really powerful example of that, because it was on a call prior to school closures at the beginning of March. We were just starting to get the first inklings of this is going to get bad, that are starting to come in. We had a call with our partners that was supposed to focus on something else entirely. And in the middle of it, someone said, hey, can we talk about this? We're starting to hear some real panic about what's going to happen when schools shut down. Schools are going to shut down. And literally within days, we were able to working together, we were able to develop a set of recommendations for some initial state and district responses to what we knew were going to be the huge needs in our most impacted communities. And so kind of going deeper than just make sure you keep providing food to kids, to really thinking about the realities of families of accessing that food, right? That in some cases, leaving the house to go get it may not be viable, right? And thinking about, as we shift to digital learning, really putting the digital divide front and center, and really urging both state and district leaders to contact families and understand what their needs are at this time, just both in terms of the learning piece and in terms of the technology needs, right? And so, and that's been sort of, I think, a theme for us throughout our work with MEET. A big priority for the partnership has been really shifting who gets to be in the conversation, who gets to be at the decision-making tables, and whose voices are heard when decisions are being made. And I think one of the things that we've seen happen as COVID-19 struck is that the families that had been getting left out of the conversation before are getting left out again, and they're getting left out even more in a situation that is more and more dire, and when their voices are that much more important. And so one of our priorities in all of our advocacy throughout this time has been to continue to push both state and district leaders to listen to families and listen to educators and kind of help their input shape the decisions that they make, be it about remote learning, be it about reopening schools next year. We recently, for example, advocated for the inclusion of additional family voices and advocate voices on a return to schools working group that our department put together that frankly did not include a lot of those voices at the beginning. In terms of generally in our advocacy, I would say it has been, like drinking from a fire hose, and clearly one of the challenges is always prioritization. And I think we, like a lot of other folks, have sort of phased in the work a little bit. The initial priority was really about making sure that the immediate needs of families were met, be it food, be it setting up kids for success with remote learning, be it meeting the needs of our English learners and students with disabilities, particularly our kids with disabilities for whom the interruption and consistency of schooling and supports that they were getting in schools, having those disappear suddenly was going to be a huge challenge. And then we shifted very much to thinking about how to actually make remote learning, how to make it better, how to minimize the educational impacts of all of this. And we, I think another sort of big lesson learned for us, for everyone throughout this time, has been that relationships matter, right? I think it's something we all knew, but it's becoming more and more evident. And that's true at the school level and with families, and at the district level with families. It's also true for advocacy, though. And so I think this is a time when sort of having that critical friend relationship with decision makers is really important. And that the fact that we had already started to develop those relationships, I think, has helped us be at the table and get asked for input. So we had the opportunity, for example, in April, to provide input on some guidance around remote learning that our Department of Education was working on. And that, again, sort of happened because some of those relationships were already in the works. And I think the third thing I will say, I'm not going to sort of look ahead yet, because I frankly see just as many challenges coming our way. It's almost, Marielle and I have been talking a lot about this, and in some ways it feels like a tsunami, right, heading towards us for the next school year. So there's a lot to say about that. But one thing kind of looking back that's been really important for us also is maintaining the community of advocates. I think oftentimes we ourselves throw ourselves into this work fully at a time that's really hard for everybody. And so when all of this started, we typically meet with our partners once every month. We shifted to weekly meetings to create that space for folks to just be with each other and share, and to share information, share their experiences, bring their full selves, right, to the table. We had some of the greatest engagement and sort of some of the richest conversations we've had in a long time in those meetings. And so we're now down to twice a month, every other week, so things have settled a little bit. But again, we're continuing to do those community check-ins and provide that space for conversations, both about how people are doing and also about sort of how they are experiencing this, as I said, both incredibly promising and really painful moment when it comes to the attention that we're seeing to issues that have existed in our country for a really long time.
And I'll add that it's been in community that, for me personally, I have found my fuel. There are days, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, when getting up out of bed feels like just a huge act of courage unto itself. And so knowing that I get to wake up and work with the partners that we work with has been a gift during these 3 months. So thank you, Natasha, for representing the work from Massachusetts. I'm gonna do a quick time check. It is 3:47. And I am excited to hear from Tennessee and Louisiana a little bit about sort of what they're seeing in their states, what they've been working on, and some lessons that they're taking away. And after that, I would love to sort of hear super quickly from each of you, what's giving you hope moving forward? right? I think it's incredibly important for us to rest in the light, given that there is a lot that is dark. And so start thinking about that. But first I'm gonna go to, what did I say? Let's go to Jeannie first. Jeannie, tell us, maybe just take 2 minutes. Tell us a little bit about what you all have prioritized in this time, and also just lessons you're taking away already.
Sure. So, I think it's difficult as advocates to convene people in this time. So you have to be really creative about finding ways to get voices raised. And so we've been able to do that through some interesting work with student advocates and organizing them. We've done some interesting watch parties with our Senate and House legislative meetings. Happy to share offline about that interesting strategy. So we've really obviously prioritized the essentials, access to food, access to a pandemic EBT card, access to digital learning. But we're also really focused right now on this issue of funding and protecting the funding that education has now in both K-12 and higher ed, and then really with an eye towards when this turns around, we have to have faith that it will, that we can really have a meaningful conversation about changing how funding works in Tennessee for education and fully funding in an equitable way education for our students. And so I think the other thing I would say is that we are hopeful that the state and for districts to really support teachers in this move to distance learning, and we're encouraging and working with partners to encourage them to tap their teachers and leaders of color to help them design reentry plans that are focused on ways to make families feel welcome, students feel welcome and accepted when they return to school, to use those cultural sort of bridges, whether it's language, culture, race, whatever it is, to make sure families return and feel welcome. And then we are going to focus on making sure that there's still expectations that learning will occur and that we will make up for lost time. And whatever that looks like, we will continue to push for that. So thanks.
All right, and I think we're next. So sorry about any commotion that comes through. We actually had a power line fall in our building, and the power has been trickling and people are like all over the place. So just getting into the question, really what I think has been an opportunity for us in this moment is to really take a step back and actually reflect on people's feelings. I think so many times in this work, like we become so task oriented that we forget about that we're still in the business of people. So really making sure that our advocates and our coalition partners are just well. I just know for me, as I talked about, I show up into this work as a Black man. It's been really hard. It's been really hard and it's been really painful just to get out of bed. There was a week where I just woke up crying, went to bed crying, just from pain, from hurt, just for wanting an opportunity for this country to work for every single person that we work for and get up and work for every single day. So really taking a moment to reflect in this moment, to check in with people, to see how people are feeling, to check in with their feelings, to make sure that they're well. There was a blog that went out about, yes, sir, I'll have your task tomorrow. When really I'm having struggles just getting out the bed. So I think it's important for us to take that step back and just really check in with people's feelings. But inside of that, and the work, I think, continues around the digital divide. Oftentimes we give people, we send kids home with laptops and just expecting magic to happen, not even addressing the connectivity issues. When you have 5 and 6 students in a house using one Wi-Fi, like the broadband access and limits to that. So just really taking a step back to figure out how we as advocates can really advocate for people on behalf of people and not advocating on behalf of tasks. And I think one of the challenges in that has been that oftentimes in education at this moment, equity has become the #1 talking point. And equity has to no longer be a talking point in this work, and it has to actually be a verb. Like, you have to really be about the business of being an equitable organization and actively advocating for equity. I think it's in this moment that we all as advocates need to take a step back and see what we're doing and how we show up into this educational advocacy work as it relates to equity. I mean, if you walk into a room and you said that you're speaking on behalf of Black and brown students, but your entire leadership team does not reflect that students, that's a problem, because representation matters. And if we're going to truly advocate for these students, we have to make sure that we're coming to the seat at the table while creating a seat at the table for those people to actively advocate for students that represent them. So I think this moment has been a real opportunity to access or evaluate quality over quantity, because oftentimes in coalition work we talk about, oh, we had 99 partners to sign on to the work, but what quality of work are those partners bringing to equity and the work of equity? So I think that that's been a great opportunity here in Louisiana, because oftentimes in this work and education advocacy, we are one of the only organizations that's led by African Americans who represent the students that we're fighting for. So I think for me, that's a problem. We have to really take a moment to see how we show up to this work and do our part. So I think if every organization takes an opportunity to address their own work in this moment, we'll have an opportunity to really create those equitable opportunities that we all fight and talk about so many times.
Amen, my brother. I just put in the chat, Tramel taking us to church. I appreciate you. I appreciate your honesty and transparency about how you are processing this yourself and as a leader. I think it's so critical that those of us in positions of leadership are able to speak plainly and speak openly about how we're doing too. There are a lot of people looking to us, looking at us. And I think that these aren't normal times. And sometimes I think it has been toughest to sort of keep up the pretense of like doing life and doing our days as if we don't have these pandemics roaring all around us. And so I think when we honor our humanity and honor where we are at, I think it allows other people to do the same. And so thank you, Tramel, for modeling that just now. I want to take, again, so it's 3:54, just a minute or less, share some hope with us. Just what is sort of making you smile in this moment and sort of letting you think that we will get to the other side of this. And so we will start, I'm gonna do a little background thing. So I'm gonna start with California, then I'm gonna have Tennessee, Louisiana, Massachusetts, and New York. So Chris, kick us off.
Yeah, 1 minute, hope. You know, I am on the personal side of things, I'm hopeful that in my communities, I'm hopeful because folks are finding ways to be more connected, even though we're not connected physically. So that keeps me, I'm very hopeful about that. You know, my family's across the country and we're finding ways to be more connected now than I think we've ever been. So I'm very hopeful that we'll continue those things, you know, if and when we, whenever this pandemic lifts. On the work front, you know, it's not lost on me that a lot of the things I'm hopeful about are because of, I think are being driven in part by the murder of George Floyd. I think folks in our state are feeling like they have to be responsive. And I think that in some ways makes me very hopeful because there are things that we can now, you know, one of the issues we've had is getting folks to be clear about what they're saying they plan to do. Like we needed some clear things so that we can hold folks accountable. In California, with its problematic history and faux progressivism, particularly around like Black Americans and Latino Americans, now we actually have some like real commitments that I'm hopeful that we can hold folks accountable for moving forward. So that makes me hopeful. I'm also hopeful because our coalitions are stronger than they ever have been. And they're being led by people of color. And I'm happy about that. I think that's an important thing that we are honest about doing more.
Thank you, Chris. I'm switching the rest of you to 30 seconds to 45 seconds. Jeannie, you're up.
I'll go. I just put a link in the chat. What inspires me are 4 teenage girls in Nashville, young women in Nashville, who led a march of over 10,000 people a couple of weeks ago. The most inspiring, beautiful thing we've seen in a long time. So the children are the future for sure in this movement. So I'll pass it along.
So I think it's me, and I think similar to what Jeannie just stated, I think what really gives me hope is the student engagement in this piece. I think it's an opportunity for us as advocates, again, to sit down and prioritize like students, like that is the voice that we're speaking for oftentimes, and oftentimes they're left away from the table. So what really gives me hope is us having the opportunity to re-engage students in the fights and the movements for social justice, for educational equity and advocacy. So just continue to lean on students to really lead the path forward for us to create real equity in education.
Two quick things that make me hopeful. One is the work of our partners, for sure. I said early on in this crisis set in, in these moments, you look to the helpers, right, to quote Mr. Rogers. And so certainly, I think watching the way that the organizations that we work with have stepped up to support their families and communities has been really just a daily inspiration. The second thing is I think that we're seeing a shift in the conversation, particularly among educators, I think, who are being a lot more self-reflective in this moment, and particularly among our white educators, and are really thinking about what they can be doing differently in their classrooms and their interactions with students and what they teach and how they teach it. That I think is finally opening up some doors for some conversations that we've had to have for a long, long time, and frankly, that have not happened at the scale that they need to just yet.
I am most hopeful about what happens next. Imagine a world without COVID. As many times as we have read, the educational circumstances have been exacerbated. The inequities have been exacerbated by COVID. They've also been exposed because there are so many people that were suffering in silence and so many people that had no clue about what folks were experiencing. And it's front and center, and we have no choice but to do something about it. And we've asked over and over about dismantling the system. It's been dismantled, and we can build what we want. And so that makes me hopeful.
So Dia just gave me goosebumps. I don't think you can see it on the Zoom, but this is why hope matters, y'all. So thank you. What gives me hope is y'all. And to look out and see these faces and see these names and know that we are coming from all over this country. Yes, that's what it's all about. And so thank you for spending this hour with us. Just to reflect back one thing, I heard a bunch of really good stuff, taking away from today the importance of representation at decision-making tables of power. The fact that relationships matter, that partnerships matter, that we have to be able to listen to the folks, especially those who are on the receiving end of the brunt of these pandemics. It's important that we hear what they are saying and that then we take that in order to take action. I'm gonna reflect back the tetheredness of academics and our humanity and how we take care of ourselves, the importance of health and wellness through all of this. And I think it was Tramel who said, check in with your feelings. I know that often we're just in this martyr sort of place of this, let's do and let's sacrifice, but your heart matters, your spirit matters. And I'm gonna close with a Tramel quote again. He said, advocate for people on behalf of people, right? We are in the business of hopefully making and driving policy change, but this is really people work. And so let's keep that at heart. And I'll just thank you one final time. Hope you all join us again. And thank you to our panelists. I wish we could have an applause track so we could all be like, way, but I'll just clap myself. And you guys can use your emojis. But thank you all so much, and hopefully see you soon.